Hey guys, welcome back to the Beeware Podcast. My name is Sarah Gold and I am your host for today. It's about 9 a.m. and we're finally starting to get some cooler weather here in the Bluegrass. As always, we're going to start off with our joke of the day. What singer is most popular for bees? The answer is Beyonce. Well, I tried to lighten the mood, but as you know, America is facing a serious epidemic and more people are dying every day. As you know, the disease is known as the bees Hun epidemic. Over the past few months, there have been over 60 million cases and 57 million deaths in the southern region of the United States, where an estimated 114 million people live. This has been one of the largest epidemics that the South has ever seen. The population of the South has been cut by 50%, and we must do something before more than half of its population is dead. Now, before we get started, we have an advertisement from our favorite sponsor. Smucker's Jam wants to remind you that jam is the best condiment to put on your biscuit in the morning, and not honey. Welcome back. Today we are going to discuss a few topics regarding the bees Hun epidemic, including how and where this epidemic started, what its main characteristics are, the aftermath of the epidemic, and changes in society you might expect to occur in the next few months. So, many of you are probably wondering how and where this epidemic started. As you know, honey has been put on recall in almost every southern state, and local honey companies have been completely shut down. This epidemic actually started from a serious bacterial disease carried by the honeybee called mel, which is Latin for honey. We have a representative from the National Honey Board here today to help explain how honey is made and how this bacterium, carried by the bee, ends up in the honey that people eat every day. Hey Maddie, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
We were hoping you could tell us a little bit about the honey making process and how the honey made by these honeybees infected with bacteria makes it to someone's pantry.
No problem. Honey is actually made from the nectar that bees collect from flowers and store inside their stomach. Digestive enzymes work together to break down nectar into simple sugars stored inside the honeycomb. The design of the honeycomb and constant fanning of the bees' wings cause evaporation, creating sweet liquid honey. Beekeepers harvest it by collecting the honeycomb frames and scraping off the wax cap that bees make to seal off honey in each cell. Once the caps are removed, the frames are placed in an extractor, forcing honey out of the comb. After the honey is extracted, it's strained to remove any remaining wax and other particles. Some beekeepers and bottlers might heat the honey to make this process easier, but that doesn't alter the liquid's natural composition. After straining, it's time to bottle, label, and bring it to you. It doesn't matter if the container is glass or plastic, or if the honey is purchased at the grocery store or farmer's market. I want all listeners to remember, if the ingredient label says pure honey, nothing was added from the bee to hive the bottle.
Oh, that makes sense, how the bacteria is spread from bees to humans when they eat honey.
Exactly. And although not everyone eats honey, this disease is extremely contagious once contracted, and that is why people are continuing to die from this disease. Also, some people continue to eat honey because they don't believe that the disease, killing millions in the South, really all originates from a small honeybee.
Wow, well hopefully this is a wake-up call to everyone. Thank you for your time today, Maddie, and I'm sure we'll hear from you soon. You guys won't believe it, but over the break, I just got a breaking news update that new research on finding a treatment for this bacteria has just come out. Experts have been trying to find a treatment for this bacterial infection for months that so many people have already contracted. Also, a national ban on honey making in the United States has just been enforced before it starts to spread to other regions of the company. Officials are afraid that as bees produce offspring, more and more honey farms will start to have the same issue as this bacteria is spread. Now, listeners may be wondering what are the main characteristics of this disease and the symptoms to look out for. One of our listeners' moms submitted a story of her daughter who sadly passed away last week from the disease. Her daughter had kept a journal of her symptoms. She loved tea and drank honey with her tea every morning and didn't believe honeybees were causing this epidemic, so she continued to do so. She wrote that this disease had 3 stages, each getting progressively worse. The journal entries say within the first 24 hours of eating honey, you will break out in fever, sweats, chills, and nausea. She compared the first stage of symptoms to food poisoning that doesn't go away. Within a week, she wrote about her flu-like symptoms with muscle pain, shortness of breath, extreme weakness, and an increased fever. And eventually, a friend watching over her took over her journal and wrote that it led to septic shock and death when her organs failed and she experienced a significant drop in blood pressure. Her mother is hoping that researchers have made a way on antibiotics that can treat this bacteria carried by honeybees. She is now a huge advocate in spreading awareness and raising funding. So now we'll wrap up the episode of Beeware today with discussion of changes in society that our listeners might expect to occur in the next few months. The aftermath of an epidemic such as bees hun often causes major societal changes because of the devastating impact. This could be things such as mental health changes of people who have lost loved ones, cultural changes, advancement in education, and more. Before we dive in, I would like to share an email that one of our listeners wrote into us. She said, "This disease actually reminds me a lot of the Black Death, though there are a few key differences. Instead of a honeybee, rats and fleas were the infected animals carrying the disease. The bacterium was spread through bites of these infected animals instead of through the honey-making process. Like the pneumonic form of the plague, this disease can be passed from person to person." And she also let us know she heard this information from one of her other favorite podcasts called How the Black Death Worked. Guys, I find this so interesting because I never thought of the similarities before. And with that being said, we can look at what history has taught us and discuss the ways we predict society will be changed with evidence from the Black Death. Society learned many lessons from the Black Death, such as advancement in education, which I mentioned earlier, increasing globalization, little escape from infection, and of course the idea that history repeats itself, as we are seeing with the bees hun epidemic. Also during the plague, people were naive and believed that there were superstitious reasons for the disease and didn't believe any theories that were presented. We have learned this isn't the way to handle disease, and instead we must find scientific ways to stop the spread of disease. In this day and age, from what we have learned from the past, the South is really trying to manage this outbreak as best as we can by trying to stop the source of the infection. The source of this infection is honeybees, so Americans are trying to institute control over bees as well as control over the honey making. Also, many are trying to reduce vulnerabilities. We have seen that people with weak immune systems are the most affected, but bees hun doesn't discriminate on gender or socioeconomic class. Mostly if you eat honey or come into contact with someone who has, then you are at risk. Anyway, back to changes in society and how society is handling this disease. There has been lots of talk about verifying that patients are being given appropriate treatment once there is one discovered. Also, we have seen changes in many hospitals who are isolating patients with this disease so it doesn't spread. I actually read an article called Science and Letters which discussed the public health orders that took place during the plague. Some of these included no items removed out of infected houses, every visited house to be marked with a red cross, and every visited house to be watched with watchmen to keep the ill inside. These are orders that seemed practical and sensible back in the day, and some concepts of isolation are still used today, but are a little less harsh now that we have a better understanding of the transmission of disease. With that being said, the aftermath of the epidemic has caused many investigations of the honeybee species to understand further about this bacteria and hopefully lead to further advancement in education. Finally, I think we will see funding efforts for vaccines that are key in stopping more outbreaks. We saw with the plague that eventually the plague vaccine came out and is a vaccine used today against Yersinia pestis. There are not nearly as many cases of Black Death as there were in the past, and that's because there is a vaccine to prevent. As my listeners know, I believe vaccines are vital in preventing disease, like bees hun. To wrap up, we know that eventually big diseases like this seem to subside after a while and disappear until the next big outbreak. We hope this is the case and must prepare to prevent outbreaks in the future from honeybees and in other areas of the country. Alright, well that's all we had today, but thanks for listening and we hope you tune in next time. We'd like to give a special thank you to the National Honey Board as well as Smucker's Jam. Tune in next week for more updates and always remember to beware.